We wanted to talk about how the rankings are made because that's something that I always wondered when I was a player. So we brought on Drew Locascio, Illinois and Wisconsin scouting supervisor, along with Vinny, our scouting director here in Wisconsin, to talk about the rankings. Guys, thanks for joining us for this.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thanks, David. Privileged to be on here for the first time. Should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, first of many, hopefully. But when I was a player a few years ago, not that long ago, I always wondered how the rankings were made. I'll be honest, I kind of pictured Steve Nielsen, Andy Soroka sitting in a boardroom, maybe Steve standing by the whiteboard. It's like Moneyball. He's got the different magnets with all the players' names on them, moving them around. Okay, I need to put this guy over this one. This guy, these two pitchers, they're similar. Is that anything close to how it works?
I was gonna say you're not totally wrong. But yeah, you mentioned Steve Nielsen. He was a longtime Wisconsin director. He now is in more of a national role with the company and helps with day-to-day operations. But he did an unbelievable job, kind of starting in Wisconsin, getting the ball rolling up there. Now we're able to pass it on to Vinny, and the state's never been in better hands. Really lucky to have Vinny with us, and he's a huge resource with what we do now with the rankings, along with our whole staff. Andy Soroka, Josh Fields are very instrumental in the rankings, and you're not totally wrong. Look, the rankings is by far the hardest part of the job, at least from where I sit. Having to put a number on a player, it's never easy. You know, these guys are young, they're always evolving, they're always changing, and it's a ton of responsibility to put a number on a player and to peg him as either it's 87th in the state or first in the state or not ranked at all. And there's a lot of kids that care a lot about that number. So we do not take that lightly. It is a group effort, and it's something that we are diligent about. And I'll never sit here and say that we're perfect. Rankings will never be perfect. We try to get them as good as we can get them. And with that said, like, how do you get them as good as you can get them? You see as many players as many times as possible, and as many different varied looks from as many different eyes as we can. And we value everybody's opinion on our staff. We all have different things that we like and look for, sweet tooths, and you got to kind of marry all that. But how we do the rankings, you know, we utilize Google Sheets. And we have players listed on the Google Sheets. And as we're seeing players, we're constantly making comments. We're color coding. We're moving them within our sheet. We're adding players to the sheet. We are putting our grades on them in that sheet. So we have internal grades that we use. And any time that we see a player, it can be used for invite-only events such as the Wisconsin State Games, the Wisconsin Future Games team. It doesn't have to be at an event. Anytime we're walking down the street and I see a kid playing catch, like that could potentially go, if I really like the arm action and the actions he's showing receiving the baseball, like he may get his name into that ranking sheet. But we're so lucky, with Prep Baseball and Sean Duncan and what they've done with this company, with all of the data and athletic testing that we use now at events. We're really able to dial in, as full of a picture of these players and prospects as we can. So we understand, like, coming to a showcase, it's not a game. They're not facing 85 with a good breaking ball. They're seeing 10 pitches in BP. They're running a 60. They're doing defense. But we're collecting all of these measurables, okay? And we're starting to paint that picture of a player. We're looking at the swing, like, one guy may get a 98 mile an hour exit velocity and another guy may get a 98 mile an hour exit velocity during BP, but those can vary on how they get to that exit velocity. Is it easy? Is it whippy? Is it loose? Is it using the whole field, or is it all turn and burn, nothing but pull, shouldery, stiff? A swing that maybe doesn't look like it's going to play in a game as well as that guy that's loose, flicking the barrel, spraying the ball around to all fields. So, we are looking at swings. We're looking at body types. We're looking at maturity levels. We're looking at actions. But that's all in a showcase setting. So, David, what we really try to do is take all of the information we're getting at showcases, build our follow list of, hey, these are the guys we need to attack and see play in a game. See, the spring is huge for us. Seeing these guys play for their high school programs, represent their communities and their schools, and then see how they perform, see how they compete, see how they handle themselves in the box or on the mound after a bad call or the guy behind them makes an error. All of that helps paint the picture of who these guys are, gives us the full picture. And then from there, we are trying to figure out who we think the best players and prospects in the state are. And I think the biggest misconception with the rankings is it is not a who do you want to give the ball to right now ranking. Like, who are the best players in the state currently right now? There is a prospect aspect to the rankings where we're constantly evaluating the floor and the ceiling. Because we want to evaluate not only who's going to be, who's good right now, but once they get into pro ball, once they get into college, that next level, who's going to continue to ascend. And we're looking for the guys that are going to continue to ascend. We don't want to look at that guy that maybe he's 16 years old and he's got a full beard and he's more physical than everybody else and he throws 88, but it's stiff. He can't spin it. We don't know if he's going to get any better. We want those loose, athletic, upside, young-looking athletes that are going to continue to get better. And those guys tend to sit higher on our rankings. We also look at position profile. Up the middle of the field is always valued at a higher level than a corner guy, that maybe plays third base right now, but he's going to be moved off the corner because defensively at the next level, it's going to have to go to first base. Well, if he's a first baseman only, that puts a ton of pressure and value on his bat. He better really hit versus those guys that can play up the middle, that can run, guys that hit left-handed, guys that pitch left-handed are always going to be valued at a higher level. And you look at the guys that get committed out of every state every year, the earliest commits are always those up-the-middle athletes, those left-handed pitchers, or those guys with just really off-the-charts tools, one or two tools that you just can't teach. A guy like Dominic Santarelli with all field, whole field plus power. A Cal Moreau that can play up the middle of the field as a true two-way guy. We don't know what he's going to be best at yet, but we love the athlete, the frame, the makeup, the fact that he is a two-way guy. It's like, wow, how good is this guy going to be on the mound when he finally just, commits to pitching? Or maybe he'll never have to do that because the bat's going to continue to play up and he's going to be a position guy and he runs a 6'6", and he's checking a ton of boxes. So, Vinny, that is me, long-winded, just throwing it all out there, and I would love to open it up. But the rankings is such a big question with so many intricacies to it, and I hope I'm just kind of letting you guys in a little bit to what we do here.
No, Drew, I mean, it is I could listen to you talk all day about this because, one, you're one of the foremost experts on this topic in the entire company of prep baseball. And look, I scouted for 4 years for the Texas Rangers. I rubbed elbows with some of the best evaluators of talent in the game. Drew, I'm not kidding. You're right up there with that kind of ability. And I just love hearing you talk and explain this and break this down for players and for parents, really, because it's super important to understand how this is all kind of going into our assessment of a player. And look, these are high school kids. These are kids that are freshmen and sophomores. We're talking about 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18-year-old players, right? The last thing that we want to do is really just kind of, hurt a kid's confidence. That is not what we're doing in terms of and when we break these kids down and when we're ranking them. Look, I played in the big leagues, guys, and I wasn't on any list, right? I was never ranked. I wasn't even heavily recruited. I was a late bloomer physically. There was some indicators there that I could play at the next level, but again, I was one of the most undersized players in the entire state. I ended up going to UW La Crosse, a Division III school. I use that as fuel to get myself better at the game of baseball. And I talk to players all the time. Drew, I know you talk to players all the time about have it a focus of yours to get to your ceiling. That should be your main focus. How can I get better today at the game of baseball? And I use the fact that I wasn't recruited. I wasn't on any of these lists in order to get better at the game of baseball. And that's what we tell players. If you don't like where you are ranked, use that as fuel to get better. Use that as fuel to get better every single day at this game. Because, look, once you guys do that, if you have that mindset, and if you find a school based on perhaps our rankings, if you find a school that is a good fit for you, let's say you're a lower-ranked kid, and then all of a sudden you just get better at the game. There's multiple examples of that where now all of a sudden guys are at a Division I program just because they use that as their fuel, they use that as their motivation that they were going to prove everybody wrong, and they find themselves to this day at a Division I program. There's a number of examples of that. And so,
absolutely, I love it, Vinny. I love it, and you couldn't be more spot on. I think the biggest thing is, like, the number doesn't matter. You know, we're putting a number on you. It's an indicator at this point in life. You're 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. Like, Vinny, use it as fuel. Whether you're the second-ranked player in the state, I want to prove them I'm the first. If you're unranked, there are so many players in Illinois, Wisconsin that go unranked that are good players. We have to cut it off at a certain point and never let the number that we put on you influence how you feel about yourself as a baseball player. We're one company. We're one organization. There's so many colleges out there, and all it takes is one guy to like you. And control what you can control. You can't control what number we put on you, what we rank you. I'll tell you what, you can control getting better every single day. And that is how you're going to get noticed. And that's regardless of getting noticed, at the end of the day, if you look back 3-4 years down the road after high school and say, man, I worked my butt off to get better every single day, at least you can lay your head down at night and say, man, I gave it my all. And I just either wasn't good enough or I got overlooked or whatever it may be. But I'm telling you, if you do that, you're going to put yourself in a position to succeed. And that's what we want to see. So go ahead, Vinny.
Yeah, and one of the things that we do look at, and when we are collecting these small bits of information about every single player, and look, we've been around so many players, and we've seen so many games at this point, and we've seen so many players at the showcase, at showcases that we run at Prep Baseball. We gather these little bits of information that we know what are the indicators that are going to go into whether or not you're going to be a higher rank or a lower rank. And one of them that is overlooked, I think, by a lot of players is that level of character, that level of makeup. Where are you at on that spectrum that I think, again, a lot of players don't see and don't focus on enough? Because kind of what we're talking about here, guys, is the fact that if you have a high character player, if you have a player that wants to get to his ceiling, that loves the game of baseball, that is very passionate about the game of baseball, we can sense that within about 5 seconds of watching a player perform, even at a showcase, guys. So make that a priority to improve upon that. And that is something, yes, it's something that a lot of players just kind of naturally have, but it is something that you can work on. How hard do I work? How much do I love the game? How passionate am I? So when we are ranking you guys and when we are making our assessment on you guys and gathering those little bits of information, again, that we can pick up on, believe it or not, we can pick up on these things very, very quickly. That is something that I would recommend most players continually work on. Where am I in terms of my level of want and desire in getting to that ceiling? So I know, Drew, that is a big indicator for you as well.
Yeah, and I just think in general, you look at where the game is going, and you look at these guys that are getting drafted, are performing in the big leagues. It is all about getting as big and as strong and as dynamic as you can get. And we're reaching a very pivotal time of year for these guys in Wisconsin, Vinny, to where you can make or break your next year with what you do in this off season. If you're going to live in the weight room, if you're going to just, force your parents to feed you, 10 meals a day and put more protein into your system than you ever have, you guys are going to be the ones that earn it and do it. And it takes that level of commitment and, hitting the weight room and just becoming as dynamic and as athletic as possible. I cannot stress that enough. Those are the guys that get attention. Dynamic athletes that play with pace, that play with a motor, that play with a chip and an edge on to their game. Man, those are the guys that succeed. Those are the guys that any coach is looking for. You never want to have to coach a motor. You never want to have to coach paying attention, IQ, reading a ball in the dirt. Like, you want guys that you have to pull back they're so aggressive you have to pull them back and, hey, like, chill out here, you know what I mean? So that's what we're looking for. That's what I think anybody's looking for. And just, if you want to talk about things you can control right now, sure, great, go throw 88, in the winter and work on your weighted balls, but get as big and as strong and as athletic as you possibly can. I cannot harp that enough, and don't look at me as like the example there, because clearly I could have benefited from that as well. But no, Vinny, that's a huge thing for me. And this winter, being in Wisconsin, when you're forced to be indoors, obviously you should be living in the cage, but be moving some weight, hit that weight room. So.
No, I love it. And David, I think that's a pretty good assessment of really how we do it, how the rankings are put together, and is a good call out, Drew, on the fact that in Wisconsin specifically, Andy Soroka, Josh Fields, like those guys are absolutely instrumental as well in putting together these rankings, getting out to as many high school games as we're able to do so. And David, you were instrumental in doing that as well last year specifically, and again hopefully this year. But that's how we do it, guys. I mean, we try to get to as many games, and look, at the end of the day, it does help. It does help just, again, gathering little bits of information in getting to a showcase. We got to see you guys. I mean, it is very, very imperative, at least one a year, just so that we can see how you guys are developing as well. So again, if you pop, and Drew kind of has mentioned this before in the past, if you do pop, all of a sudden you're throwing 5 miles per hour harder, or all of a sudden that 60 is below that 7-second mark, that coveted 7-second 60, get to a showcase and show us if that's your second showcase of the year. That way we can use that new information and adjust the rankings accordingly. But yeah.
Vinny, and I'll keep jumping on here because you're bringing up great points. And I mentioned it in the beginning, but like we utilize our showcase and our showcases to really get that inside info on the player, all those metrics, all those data points. Like, what makes our job with the rankings so difficult is we have such varied looks on these players. We may have seen a guy like Dominic Santarelli take 50 in-game at-bats. But then we may be floating around the rock and we see, I may see 2 at-bats of a guy. And I'm like, okay, I really like to swing. Okay, I had a 4-3 down the line. I see him kind of floating out around shortstop. He looks like a dude to me. He looks like a guy that should be in the rankings. But I don't know the true 60. I don't know the true exit velocity. I don't know what that arm's playing at across the infield. And that's kind of just why it's so important to paint that full picture. To get to an event so we can really lock in and see, okay, that is what the swing looks like. And, okay, now I've seen the way he competes in a game, and I can kind of marry them both together and get just a much better opinion on you as a player. And I think what it does is it affects our confidence level. That's probably the biggest thing when we go into rankings is who are we most confident about? Like, who have we seen a bunch? Who have we seen really good consistently over and over versus those guys where, man, like he flashed a really good swing, but then, okay, I saw him against the breaking ball, hated the breaking ball, struck out 3 times. Like, I don't know if that's going to, like, that affects confidence level. So I think that's a huge part of the rankings is who are we more sure on? And that's going to come down with how many looks we have on guys. And, that's on us. Like, we get it. Like, that's why we're so diligent about getting out in the spring and running all the tournaments we do at the Rock. And we go to events such as Area Code and other things that aren't even our events. We're trying to learn and know every player in the state. And it's impossible. We're not going to know every player in Wisconsin, but we're darn well going to try. We're going to try to know as much as we can on them, whether they're the top 1% or that guy that's fighting for that, top 200 ranking who potentially could go D3. Those are the guys we really care about. Dominic Santarelli, those numbered top 3 guys, anybody's going to know about them. Their talent, like, that's not who we're here for. Yeah, we'll try to put them in environments and situations such as the Super 60, All-American Game, Future Games to, be seen by the people they need to be seen by. But really where I think we move the needle are the 98 percenters that fit into this much larger bucket of, man, I just really want to play college baseball, and I want to find the right fit. And that's where I think our unbiased, what we can do, what we talk to with coaches, like, I don't lie. Like, if I see you dog it down the line to first base and, Wisconsin Whitewater asked me about, I'm going to tell them exactly what I saw. And I think that's why they come to us. We're not somebody that you guys are, paying to get lessons from, or a travel team that you pay for to play in the summer. Like, we are not going to be trusted by anybody at that next level if we're not telling the truth. So know that as a player, like, you better be on your P's and Q's no matter what, whether we're there or not. That's just how you should handle your business. And I could go on for hours and hours with this, Vinny, because it's super important. And I feel like with what we see in today's day and age is a lot of guys tend to, sabotage themselves with some of the actions on the field rather than elevate themselves. And it's little things that they can control: how you run down the line, how you get in and out of the dugout, how you react to a bad call, how do you react to a teammate after you struck out and your teammate hits a home run. Are you sulking at the end of the bench? Like, is that who you are? Or are you a team guy? And you think, like, people may roll their eyes, but these coaches, they choose who they want in their programs. If you live in Kenosha, you may be forced to go to those public schools, but like these coaches at Wisconsin Parkside, at Milwaukee area, like they are choosing their teams and their lives depend on it. Putting food on their table depends on recruiting the right guy. So it's the better you become, the more important that stuff becomes.
Oh, I love it. And the fact that we're so passionate, you can hear it in Drew's voice, how passionate we are about getting this right. We're not going to get it right all the time, but again, we don't take this lightly by any stretch of the imagination. You should hear some of these conference calls that we are on about the rankings and agonizing over players and where this kid should slot in and where, should this. And the other important thing we should mention too, real quickly, Drew, is the fact that when a player, let's say, maintains his ability level, but 4 other guys really took a huge jump, let's say, in the spring season, but we still like that other player, and it looks like that player is dropping in the rankings when in fact he's really not. These 4 other guys just took a massive step and are just ranked ahead of him. Those decisions are not taken lightly by us either. So, Drew, kind of illustrate that a little bit.
Tremendous call out. I think that's one of the biggest things with the rankings that is hard to understand and digest as an athlete, as a parent. Really, it starts with, we roll out an initial rankings with these younger classes. And these younger classes, the majority of these players, unless you are an upper echelon talent, are not playing varsity. So we're not seeing a ton of these guys when we go out in the spring and we're watching varsity games. We'll see the handful of really, really true, high-level Wisconsin young prospects coming up. But our pot of players, our pool of players that we're looking at is such a smaller selection than, let's say, those seniors that we're looking at, where there's probably 500 players now that we've seen just in the spring going to high school games. So with those younger classes, we try to keep the rankings small. We try to go with the guys we're most confident about, we feel really good are going to be high-level players someday. And as you go through high school, it's the pool of players that you are now getting evaluated between, it just grows. So what we'll do is Johnny Johnson at a high school up there in Wisconsin, we will have, let's say you make that initial top 20 list. We have an internal grade that we put on you. And if you kind of stay that same player, just kind of steadily, gradually continue to improve and kind of stay at that ranking that we kind of had you at, well, like Vinny said, within that next year, within those next couple months, when we update the rankings, we don't just update the rankings, we expand the rankings because we see more and more players in that class. So probably the best example that I have heard with explaining how our rankings work is if you go to a high school with 20 players or with 20 students and you have a 3.7 GPA, you may, with that school with 20 players, you may rank there seventh best within those 20 students at that small school. Well, that 3.7 GPA, if you now all of a sudden go to a school with 100 students, you still have a 3.7 GPA. But guess what? In that pool of 100 students, there's now 13 more guys that have a slightly higher GPA than you. Guys that we've graded out at, a certain level that's slightly higher than you. You haven't changed in our mind, but these guys have come, either in front of us for the first time or have gotten better to where now their grade has changed. And that GPA, now maybe you were 7th in that class of 20, now in that class of 100, you now are at 18. And you may think, oh gosh, I'm sliding down. But no, your grade has stayed the same. It's just harder to stay up at that top of the rankings. You have to make monumental improvements to continue to stay at that number you're at or continue to get better. And it just illuminates and magnifies as we go up in grade levels. The older you get, the more players that we see that are your age. And really when it just gets, to the biggest is when they're juniors and seniors, and those are the guys that the majority of these high school teams are made up of, and that's where we're seeing a ton of players. So, Vinny, I may have missed something in there that feel free to color in, but at least that to me is the truest way to define how guys will, maybe start at 17 their freshman year, and then by the time they're a senior, they're down to 47, 64, and they think they've dropped. And it's like, no. Your grade's still really, really good. We think really highly of you as a player. It's just, man, there's a lot of good players in Wisconsin. Like, there's a lot of good players in Illinois, and there's so many guys that don't get ranked that play college baseball, first off. So I hope that answers it, Vinny, and I always try to do a good job explaining, but that's a tough one to explain.
That's a great explanation, and probably the hardest thing that we do have to do is rank players at the lower, the younger classes. And so, and what Drew said is that is a smaller group of players, and so that is the most difficult part of the rankings. As hard as the rankings are, right, and trying to get them right, it's ranking that we have to rank the 2028s here coming up here. So it's very difficult to do, and it's something that you have that small group of players in that freshman class that you have to kind of set out a ranking, and then that changes over time, right? As we see more players, as Drew mentioned, and as players physically grow and develop, or if they don't, right? I was that kid that never grew until I was a junior in college, and so. But again, that's not an indictment if that player doesn't, and all of a sudden he is lower in the rankings. That doesn't mean that player can't play and have a very productive college career. So, yeah,
I think the other I'll end it after this is like we talked about like the varied looks that we get on guys. Like we may get one look on a guy, and he may be a Big Ten commit, but we had a bad look at him,
right.
And that was our one look. So we know, like, hey, we're judging the tools. Like, we see the arm strength, but, like, maybe you didn't have feel for the breaking ball that day. Or maybe you just really struggled out of the stretch. Maybe you just didn't have it. Maybe you were sick. Maybe you had, a broken toe, and we didn't know about it. Like, there's so many factors that go into this, and we get it. Like, we sign up for doing this. Like, we fully get it. But I think the biggest thing is informing the coaches, the players, like, hey, this is at least what we're doing. This is how we do it. This is what we're trying to do. This is what we're looking at. And I think that's why we're on this, podcast trying to explain it. Because for me, it's all about the transparency. It's all about like, hey, how did you get to this? And hey, we're going to miss. We're going to hit. We're going to miss. Hopefully we hit a lot more than we miss. To me, it's not really about that. It's about our process. Like, is our process correct? When we're going to watch a guy, like, are we looking at the right stuff? Are we evaluating the right things? And are we taking in all the information that we're getting correctly? And then are we doing the best we can to slot it from there? Like, that's really all from a supervisor's perspective. That's all I can ask for. And I love the process that we use. I love the conversations that we use. And I think you're right. If anybody were to listen in and hear how we go back and forth on players, and we care. Like, there's digs and there's emotion that goes into it. And that's the beauty of it, too, is there's no cookie cutter way to do this. And it's a beautiful thing, and it's hard, and we care. So,
yeah. Yeah, David, I think that about covers it. I mean, we just kind of covered the gamut of what we're doing and what we're looking at and the process that goes behind the rankings. It's not easy, and we don't take it lightly, but does that kind of answer your question, David?
Yeah, I had about 12 questions prepared. kind of thinking back to when I was in high school, what would I want to ask the person making the rankings? And you more than answered all of them. So that was great.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for welcoming me to the Badger State Ball podcast. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully I can get back on here, David.
I think we could make that work.
All right.
Love having you on, Drew.
Thanks for joining, Drew.
Yeah.